Hello and welcome back to Storytime with Alex, reading from Allbyon to Britannia, Book 2, The Last Witch of Old Albion by Brandy Pearson. This chapter's called The Map. The wizard Sebastian Jones has a map, and he did an enchanted tracker onto the cat gremlin so they can find out where she is, because that's the last cat that the Fellowship of the Book needed in order to try and do their spell, to try and break through the thin place, which might cause the end of all creation. Let's see what's going on. Chapter 11, The Map. The next afternoon, Mum and Dad and I went round to Miss P's for another campaign meeting and were joined by Sebastian and Father Joe and Ruth. Her mum had work to do at home and was happy for her to have something to do. Sebastian did not look happy. "What's wrong?" my dad asked. Sebastian spread out a map on the table. "We have a problem," he said. "Look." The map was the one that showed where Gremlin was. Her journey to the Browns' house was marked by the magical green line. There was also a green dot in the middle of Aubrey Gardens. "That, you would have worked out, is where she is now, with the other cats, presumably in the crypt of the Wizard's Tower." He was jabbing the map angrily with a finger. "However, as you will also see, we do not know how she got there, which was the point of the exercise." "Oh," said my dad, "so they have all the cats, and they have them in the right place. And we don't know how they got there, and so we don't know how the Ad-Track committee get there either," Sebastian said. Dad said a very rude word, and everyone stood around the table staring at the green dot. The next day, the Fraternity of the Ancient Book were going to do the spell using the cats, and we could not follow them. For the next hour, we ate Christmas food gloomily. Sebastian suggested we could kidnap the fraternity until it was pointed out to him that they were armed and would be on the lookout for any trouble. It sounded to me that he would have quite enjoyed a fight. Then there was a knock on the door. Mum, who was the nearest, went to answer the door, and we heard her say, "Can I help you?" And then we heard Rose's voice. "Good afternoon. I am Rose Cooper, the last witch of Old Albion, and I've come to help." Sebastian and Father Joe each gave each other a surprised look. Rose came in and was introduced to everyone. "We spent an hour after midnight mass trying to persuade you to come and help us, and you refused point blank," said Sebastian. "How come you have changed your mind?" "It wasn't you, my dear Sebastian. It wasn't either of you. It was Ruth, and the tale she told." Everyone looked at Ruth. Rose came over to Ruth and took her hand. "When I was born, flower names were very popular for girls. I was called Rose. When I used to go travelling about, I would always use a false name, but I stuck with flowers. When I went to Hastings and met Peter the fisherman, I used the name Lily, and when I gave birth to my daughter, I called her Violet. She had such beautiful violet-coloured eyes when she was born. They only later turned green, like mine, and like yours." Ruth stared at her. I could see her mind working. After a pause she said, "So you're my great-great-grandmother?" "I suppose I am. I should never have married him, but I was so in love with him. I virtually saw him die, you know. If I thought of it at all, I thought we would have a few years together before he realised I was not getting any older. I occasionally imagined that I might tell him, and we would go away together. I never thought he would die so soon. It broke my heart. I could not stay and bring up Violet. A time would come when we were the same age. So I left her with Mary and William. They were good people. I'm sure they brought her up well. I retreated to my cottage and stayed there, doing my best to keep away from ordinary people, because if I formed relationships of any kind, they might hurt me like Peter's death hurt me, like leaving Violet hurt me. I've spent the last 24 hours feeling sorry for myself, and then I looked in the mirror and gave myself a good talking to. You, Ruth, are my family, my descendant. That is why you had the dream about the tower. You dreamed what happened to me, and the rest of you are my family too, and I'm sorry I've shut myself away. Now, how can I help?" There was a profound silence, which was broken by Sebastian. He told her about Gremlin and the collar, and showed her the map. She frowned and said, "Could someone make me a cup of tea? I think better with a cup of tea in my hand." as do we all. Mum made us all tea, while Rose continued to stare at the map. Eventually she said, "Sebastian, you and I have the only magic in this land, don't we?" "Yes," said Sebastian slowly. "But your spell has been blocked somehow, so the path does not show on the map." "Yes." "Which has got to be magical as well." "Yes." "So whose magic is it? It's not yours, and it's not mine. I wonder, is it his?" "Whose?" asked my dad. "Albert Smith!" Sebastian shouted. "Albert bloody Smith! Of course! It must be! An escape route! He was that kind of wizard. He didn't care a stuff about the people who lived near his tower, and he didn't trust them. He must have had a tunnel so he could get out of the tower if it was attacked, and he would have protected it with magic so that no one could find it." "Could the spell have lasted all this time?" asked Father Joe. "He was a fool in many ways, arrogant and unpleasant, but he was a very skilled magician. I've had spells that have lasted over the years. I'm sure he was capable of lasting magic." "But you spent so much time in that crypt. Would you not have found an entrance to a secret tunnel?" said Dad. "He found the black cauldron in the first place by undoing a spell that hid a door to an unknown room. He must have known the spell. We were never looking for a door to a tunnel. We were only interested in finding our way through the thin place," Sebastian replied. "That explains what has happened, but it doesn't help us. We still don't know how to get into the tunnel." "You know," said Rose, "I dreamed about my oak tree last night, the one in my garden, so tall and solid. Who would have believed I would outlive it? Father Joe here helped me when I had to cut it down. It had green hollow and dangerous. If you don't mind me saying, Sebastian, I think you've forgotten something important here. You're looking at your map with walls and houses, but when Albertus Maximus built his tower, he was in the middle of a wood, mainly oak trees. They have deep roots, oak trees." "I'm sure this is going somewhere, Rose," said Sebastian tetchily. "Patience, wizard." She patted him on the arm. "Now, if I were a wizard constructing an underground tunnel in an oak wood, I would avoid the trees and their tree roots. So we're more likely to find the tunnel if we knew where the trees were." "And?" said Sebastian. "May," Rose said, ignoring him. "Might I trouble you for your green man medallion? I left mine at home." Miss P drew the medallion from round her neck. It was the medallion she had lent us to get to Rose Cottage. Rose held it up in her left hand and drew a spiral in the air with her right hand. She started to croon a little song, very quietly so I could not make out the words. Green light began to spiral out of the medallion. "Green man," she whispered, "in whose heart resides the ghosts of all the trees, show us where your children stood in the days of old." The spiral of light spread across Sebastian's mat with a rustling sound like leaves. Starting at the centre, where the tower crypt was marked, it began to shape itself, coalescing into the ghosts of trees that once stood there. When the map was covered, the green light stopped, and we looked down on the woodland as if we were giants, or floating over the land in a balloon. There was the glade in which the tower had been built. Around it there was a ring of what must have been huge old oak trees. They spread out their branches until they nearly touched. "There," said Rose, "between two of the trees there was a wider gap. That is where the wizard would have dug his tunnel. Trees are the same below as above. That's the only place where he could dig without meeting great roots of great trees." "Where would it go then?" I asked. "Well, wizards are fond of straight lines. Let us follow a straight line from the tower through that gap. Where would it lead, Miles?" There was a cracker on the table, and I used it to imagine a straight line from the tower through the trees and on. There were no trees in the way for a distance, until the line met the ghost of what had been a huge tree, not as tall as some of the others, but very broad. "The straight line would end here, Rose." Rose peered at it. "You know, I remember that tree. It was hollow, big enough for a small party. It would be a good place to disguise the end of a tunnel." "The tree must have gone many years ago," I said. "Actually, I remember that tree," said Father Joe. "The stump of it was still there when the houses were being built. You know, I've been assuming that if there was a tunnel it would lead to the Campbell's house, because that's where Aubrey House had stood. but that's because I'd been forgetting what it was like before all the houses were built. So where did that tree stump stand on the modern map? My dad said impatiently. Look, said Rose. Sebastian's map was visible beneath the ghosts of the trees. In one of the back gardens of the houses on Beacon Lane stood the ghost of the tree that must mark the end of the tunnel. Whose house is that? I asked. It's the Browns' house, said Sebastian. Of course it is. I'm an idiot. My spell traced Gremlin to its heart. Then the trail disappeared. Gremlin didn't go anywhere else. The entrance to the tunnel must be in that garden. Well, we're going to need to take a look at it, said Dad. Mum gave him a look of disapproval, but he was right. Well, we can't knock on his door and ask for a look around, can we? Said Sebastian. It was not a house that backed onto Aubrey Gardens. It was at a narrow end of the triangle. There should be a narrow path at the back of the garden, said Father Joe, but that one is completely overgrown. We tried to get along it when we were exploring, said Dad. Mum gave him another look. The kids could probably get through, said Sebastian airily. I wasn't sure whether he'd failed to notice my mum's looks or was ignoring them. If anyone saw them, they could say they were looking for the cats. That would only be the truth after all, said Dad. I could see my mum giving up at that point. Just be really careful, she said, sighing. I remembered what the Attrag had said about meeting today. If we go now, they'll be at their meeting in the community centre. Mum tried to prevent Ruth coming along, but she was determined, so we set off down the road, trying to look innocent. It was beginning to get dark. As we peered up the gap between the houses, we could see where the path had been, but there were brambles and other bushes and even some small trees. We wormed our way along, trying to be as quiet as we could. We'd worked out that the Browns' house was the third house along, but when we got there, the fence was taller than we were. Ruth asked me to bend down, hoping to climb on my back and see over, but luckily there was a loose board at the bottom, cracked halfway up. We pulled it loose and realised we could actually see the garden quite well. Most of the garden was lawn, but near the back, to our left, there was a summer house made of wood and a small veranda. I think I can get through the fence, whispered Ruth. There are no lights on in the house. I don't think anyone is at home. They must be at the Attrag meeting. Be careful, I said as she wiggled through. She crept up to the summer house and peered through the window. She tried the door, which was not locked, opened it, and looked in. Suddenly, a light went on in the house. Ruth! I hissed. She turned and saw the light, closed the door again and hurried back. She'd just squeezed back through the hole in the fence and we'd replaced the loose boards when the back door of the house opened, spilling light across the lawn. Mrs. Brown came out into the garden. We dared not move in case she heard us. I can't see anything, dear, she called back into the house. You probably saw a cat. Despite our efforts, there's still a fair number of them about. The summer house door is closed. Mr. Brown appeared. Probably getting jumpy. It's all getting so close. After all these years of planning, tomorrow at 12 noon we have an appointment with magic. We all need to go into a world of real magic, the culmination of all our dreams. They both turned around and returned indoors. When we were sure they had gone, we wormed our way back to the road. Well, I said. Steps going down into the dark. Rose is right. That's the end of the tunnel. Thank goodness for that. And we know when they'll be using it. Oh, how exciting! The next chapter is Holy Innocents' Day, the tunnel and the bridge, so it's all really about to kick off. Will they be able to stop Attrag? Will they be able to save their cats? Will they be able to save the whole of creation? I don't know. Come join me next time and find out.